In our last few videos, we've been looking at the businesses along Water Street, and in our last video, we crossed the four corners of Military and Water and briefly touched upon this corner here that we're looking at. And we showed this photograph, a very early drawing of what that corner once looked like. I've always been a little frustrated by this drawing because I could never quite figure it out. I knew there was a photographic studio on that corner, and you can see it, the gallery in this photograph here, but I never knew which one it was. The directories didn't go back that far, and the books I had, I couldn't see it. But I've since obtained a couple of different books, and I was able to find a little bit about the history of this corner, so I thought I'd share that with you, something I learned since our last video. This corner was called the Bryce Corner because it was owned by a man by the name of Mr. Bryce. In 1873, the Bryce Corner, on the northwest corner of Military and Water, burned down. All these stores were burned and demolished. And at the time of the Bryce Block fire, the building was of wood, as you can see from this picture. At least they look like they're wood. And the leading photographic studio, which was White's, was located on the second floor. Mr. White lost many of his negatives that could never be replaced. Mr. White was not deterred by the fire. He went on to build this beautiful building, White Studios, that sat across from the Harrington Hotel on the same side of the street as the Harrington. The other two businesses that were in this building was Clark's Barbershop and Marshall's Grocery and Fruit Store. Mr. Bryce built a 3-story brick building on that same corner. Later it was raised to 6 stories, and we've come to know it as the Miso Building or People's Bank Building. Alright, let's go down Water Street. Before we get to where we left off in our last video, here's a shot of Water Street looking from the opposite direction, looking toward the east. Back 100 years or so ago, they didn't have the wide-angle cameras like we do today, but here's a comparable picture back from the 1800s. You can still see part of the federal building, but the building in the foreground is blocking this out. Back prior to 1870, the streets didn't have names on them, and Water Street is not the very first street to be named, but certainly was one of the first streets to be named. It was the very first street to actually have sidewalks, and that sidewalk was a very wide plank that just ran down Water Street on both sides of the road. Years before this picture was taken, during the logging industry in Fort Huron, they used logs. They felled logs all across Water Street, and it was actually a very rough ride. It was called a corduroy road. And later on, they put cedar blocks down. The main reason was this, is that the dirt was such a mud hole. And looking from this picture, it almost looks like a dirt road, but I don't know if the cedar blocks are underneath that dirt or if that's just plain dirt. It's hard to tell. Alright, let's get back to where we left off on our last video, and that was this building right here. That was called the Carter Opera House. It was also home to Thompson Furniture, and as we saw in the last video, Bijou Theater as well. Let's skip ahead to the 1940s and see what this building looked like. In the 1940s, this building was occupied by the Kerr's Office Supply Store. Here it says, the signage out front says Kerr's Typewriter Service as well. In the 1950s, this building be occupied by the Citizens Federal Savings Bank. And you can see a photograph here. All you can make on the signage, though, is the word Federal. And if you look just to your right, that sign up there, a little bit higher than the Citizens Federal sign, says Maybelle Dance Studio. And many of the girls would remember this studio because they had to take lessons. Their parents made them. But some of the girls, I think, actually enjoyed it. That was in the previous building. I just forgot to mention it. And something else I forgot to mention, let me just backtrack here. As we go down to the bottom of the street level, we'll see something else that some of you might remember. And that's a set of stairs that goes down into, well, what was the commercial bank building at one time. You can't see the staircase very well in this photo, but in this earlier photo, you can see it quite well. And this was barber shops for years. When I was working in Port Huron, George's barber shop was there. George Hanna, I believe his name was. It was quite unique. He took appointments, and each barber had a little cubicle, which was quite private. It was a very nice barber shop. Very nice man as well. Before we leave this earlier era, I might say that the City Opera House on Military and the Harder Opera House, on the first floor, they always contained businesses. The opera houses were normally on the second and third floor, or sometimes even higher. And from this photograph, you can't really tell what that business is or what business was there, but you can in this photograph taken from a different angle. And as we zoom in here, you can see that there was a billiard hall here, and it shows it quite plainly. All right, let's get back to Citizens Federal. And some of you might remember this. As kids trying to save money, they came up with this little gadget here that you could save very easily by putting your coins in. This one was for dimes and was called the Dime Saver. But for the really big savers, they had the Quarter Kitty. Looking the opposite way on Water Street, you can see the signage for Citizens Federal Savings on the side of the building here. I believe it was the 1970s that urban renewal took most of this block out. You can see it being torn down here. And this would also accommodate a brand new building for Citizens Federal, which you can see being built here in this photograph. And if you look to your left, you can see that the Citizens Federal Savings building was already built before the rest of it was torn down. It was certainly different than any other building that was built in Port Huron, and it certainly changed the view of the riverfront. But alas, CFS didn't last. If you look here, you can see the signage is different. Citizens Federal Savings became the Palmer Bank. Alright, let's move on to the next building, right next to the white one we've been looking at, and all we can see is a little portion of that building. And we can see the windows, and in the windows they have the letters UW. I don't know about you, but something like this drives me crazy until I find out what the rest of it is. So after researching it, I found out the other letters that were in front of this was AO. AOUW, which was the nomenclature for Ancient Order of United Workmen. The Ancient Order of United Workmen was a fraternal benefit society. Fraternal benefit societies are based on the simple premise that every person is his or her brother's keeper, and therefore have a moral responsibility to each other. Because of massive urbanization during this era in the later 1800s, it created a very human need. Many found themselves lonely, alienated, and living on the financial brink. Most factory workers of the day worked long hours for meager wages, and had no form of insurance benefits to leave their dependents when they died. The AOUW was founded by John Jordan Upchurch with the aim of adjusting all differences which may arise between employers and employees, and to labor for the development of a plan of action that may be beneficial to both parties, based on the eternal truth that the interests of labor and capital are equal and should receive equal protection. Each member paid $1 into the insurance fund to cover the sum of not less than $500 in benefits paid to a member's dependent when he died. Each time a member died, $1 was due from the surviving members to reestablish the fund. Fraternal benefit societies soon became quite popular as a means of providing financial protection to working class people at an affordable rate. Additionally, fraternal benefit societies typically maintained a lodge where members could meet together in a spirit of fraternalism and brotherhood. And that's what was in this building that we see the UW on, where they met. It was the lodge for the AOUW. This group reminds me a lot of the Maccabees, including they had the same, well, not the same, but similar medals that designated different categories in their organization. In this photograph here, we see the complete building. It's just at the left of that white building that we were looking at previously. I don't think it's near as classy as the other building, but I guess it served its purposes. And at the ground level, John Murta had a sample room there. The folks of my generation, they'll remember what was in this store, and that was People Credit Clothing. You have to remember, all back, golly, this would be back in late 40s, 50s. You know, credit, you didn't have credit cards, you didn't have Visa, you didn't have MasterCard, didn't even have the Sears card. You just, you paid cash pretty much for everything. But these credit stores came into existence, and People's was one of them. I also worked at another one, the competition over in Huron Avenue. That was National Credit, later became King Clothing. And it was a type of store that didn't have the best quality. Usually asked for a down payment to try to cover their costs in case the people didn't pay. And then they had weekly or monthly payments, however you decided to do it. So these were unique stores for that time period. But once credit became more popular, these stores went out of business. You can see the People's Credit Clothing in this photograph here. And if you look at the building next door to it, this was where the Webb Coal Company had its offices. It's hard to make out the sign, but that sign that sticks out from the building does say Webb Coal Company. Alright, I think we'll stop our video here. Next week we want to look at the white block or the white building. One thing I found out in reading different history books and researching is that when it refers to a block, such as the white block, it means really the building. For example, in this block alone, the one we're looking at, this was called the Meso block, it was called the Harder block, it was called the white block, and basically it refers to a large building that is considered a block. When I read that, I always thought, well, that's what the whole block was, but I think it's just the building. So join me in my next video, and we'll look into this white block, a building that was second in height only to the People's Bank, which was 6 stories, and the white block was 5 stories.